There's a chance if the Philadelphia Eagles stay with the 32nd overall pick that whoever they select, some might see as a reach. There are 3 prospects some might see as a reach that I think are worth that pick. We'll get into it coming up next on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. Welcome into this Wednesday edition of the show. We are brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL in all capital letters for $20 off your first purchase. So the last few shows, we've been considering the scenario of the Eagles just sticking and picking, staying at the 32nd overall pick. If they do that, who's most likely to be the selection? Who's most likely to be there? Who could potentially fall? Prospects you think would be higher picks that land in their lap, like Quinyon Mitchell surprisingly did last year. Nolan Smith surprisingly did at the end of the first round of the 2023 NFL draft. We've really been getting into the idea of just staying at that pick. Obviously, trading up or trading down is the ideal scenario, but it does take 2 to tango. And if the Eagles don't feel like that pick there's a prospect worth that pick, odds are a lot of other teams will see the same thing. And this is not a loaded quarterback class where somebody's dying to get back in to the first round for that 5th-year option, like the Baltimore Ravens were, for instance, in the 2018 draft when they traded with the Eagles to get the 32nd overall pick to draft Lamar Jackson. Like, there really isn't, depends on how you feel about Jalen Milroe and Jackson Dart. I like both of them more than the consensus, but I would predict odds are teams don't view those guys like the Ravens did Lamar Jackson back in 2018, and it might make it more difficult for the Eagles to move that pick. So if they have to stay, who are the options? There are some players I'm actually more comfortable with taking there than others. So some might see these prospects as a reach, and this is like the scenario, the worst case scenario where the board just does not fall very well for Howie Roseman. In that scenario, who are 3 prospects where you're just like, I don't want anybody here, that I'd actually be okay with more than the consensus? There's 3 prospects specifically that might be seen more as day 2 selections that I'd be comfortable with. One guy is Toledo defensive tackle Darius Alexander. Another player on defense, Penn State safety Kevin Winston Jr. And then on offense, it would be Donovan Jackson, the Ohio State guard, played mostly left guard, but I think he does have left guard, right guard versatility. All 3 of these players are seen as, I would say, fringe first-round picks, more so early day 2 selections. Darius Alexander, the Toledo defensive tackle, Donovan Jackson, the Ohio State guard, and Kevin Winston Jr., the Penn State safety. I've seen mock drafts with Alexander and Jackson in the first round. Kevin Winston Jr., I don't think I've ever seen him in the first round. I saw one mock draft on NFL.com a few days ago that had Xavier Watts, the safety from Notre Dame, taken day 1. I believe it was to the Baltimore Ravens. It was in that 25 to 30 range. So those are 3 players that I think most would see the Eagles taking them as a reach that I'd actually be comfortable with. And when you talk about Darius Alexander, yes, the floor, it's a lot lower than some of these other defensive tackles. But you guys know me. I was talking about it on the show yesterday. When you're at this pick, how do you approach selecting a prospect? I'm going for upside. Yes, the floor might be a little bit lower, but if this guy has a chance to be a blue chip prospect, and there's not many of them at the end of the first round, there's not as many slam dunks at this spot, I'm going to go with potential. And Darius Alexander, yeah, he needs seasoning, but the ceiling is legit. This is an elite RAS prospect, which is raw athletic score for those that don't know. So he is an athlete. Like, he tested through the roof at the Combine, at the Toledo Pro Day. I'm sure he's going to crush that. Like, he is somebody that's very physically gifted. He's very explosive, sudden off his first step. He's long, he's powerful, and I just really like his tape. Like, again, he needs more seasoning when it comes to pass rush moves, when it comes to a counter move, hand placement, like hand usage when he's battling an offensive lineman. He needs development there. But the way, and again, because he's an athlete, he's such an athlete and he's so long and powerful, the way he can set guards up before they even get their hands on him, like, his best move is not even touching the offensive lineman. It's faking them out like he's Saquon Barkley, getting them off balance by juking inside and then cutting back in, or cutting inside and faking them out, hitting them with the chop, getting upfield that way. Like his footwork, Todd McShay said it best on his podcast. Darius Alexander, the first step, suddenness, is what makes him special. It's what's going to make him, I think, worth an end of day one, early day two selection. And also he has versatility. Toledo used him a lot at defensive end. He reminds me, honestly, of Milton Williams. Like if I had to say what his ceiling is at the next level, I could see him being a 2024 like Milton Williams at some point. Milton Williams, when he came out of Louisiana Tech, was mostly a defensive tackle, but he had defensive end experience. He played some defensive end for the Eagles early on in his career in 2021, in 2022. Alexander, though, is a longer prospect. I think he's more explosive. Is he the technician that Milton Williams is as a pass rusher? No. But again, if the Eagles are going to bring in a defensive tackle this year to replace Milton, to complement Moro Ijoma and Jordan Davis in this rotation, I want somebody that's strength is going to be rushing the passer. I believe Ijoma is going to break out in 2025, already kind of did in 2024, but this year break out more in a bigger role. But I don't think he's going to take on the same usage rate that Milton Williams did last year. I think it's going to be more of an even rotation with a rookie and with Jordan Davis. And although Jordan Davis showed some signs of developing as a rusher last year in the playoffs, I'm still not projecting him to take a Dexter Lawrence, Vita Vea-like step next year. I hope that happens, but I'm not going to rely on it. So I'm going to bring in another pass rusher to complement Ijoma next to Jalen Carter. I think Darius Alexander could be that guy. I've seen most mock drafts have him be an early second-round selection, but if the Eagles do stick and pick and they stay at pick 32, I'm comfortable with going Toledo back-to-back years on day one of the NFL draft. And then Donovan Jackson, he moves so well upfield for a guard. Like he gets from one block to another so suddenly. Like getting across a blitzer's face, he can pass one block off to the tackle, get across and get the free rusher that's coming up the A-gap. Excuse me. Donovan Jackson is an athlete. He's powerful. He's a little too handsy. I think he can get outside the shoulders of defensive linemen a lot, which could cause some issues with penalties early on in his career. But I think he has all the raw traits that Jeff Stoutland would really like as a guard. He doesn't have that guard tackle flexibility. So when you draft Donovan Jackson, it's not to eventually be the heir apparent to Lane Johnson. This is more of the scenario where you don't believe Tyler Steen is your long-term answer, and you're not banking on Kenyon Green meeting that, top 15 value that the Houston Texans placed on him in the 2022 NFL draft. Donovan Jackson could be an upgrade. And if you want a long-term starting guard to be the right size version of Landon Dickerson, to be your new Mekhi Becton, but for the long term on a inexpensive rookie contract, 4 to 5 years of team control, Donovan Jackson would make a lot of sense, especially in an offensive line it's going to be paying soon. Right now it's 3 players top 10 money. Eventually it'll be 4 when they extend Cam Jurgens. So having a long-term starter on a rookie contract with 4 to 5 years of team control is really important. If they want to take that kind of approach on day one and go with a guard that's not eventually going to play tackle, he's not a swing player, Donovan Jackson's somebody that I've seen in some mocks on day one. I think he would be much more worth the pick than you might see Darius Alexander or Kevin Winston Jr. Kevin Winston Jr. is a player, though, I really like. Again, I'm a lot higher on him than most. Some people like Xavier Watts from Notre Dame better. Some are projecting Malachi Starks and Nick Emenwari even to be available at 32, but I think both are going to go earlier than that. And Winston Jr., again, is seen more as a day 2 pick, but I would be okay with him at 32. I think he could be a good replacement to Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I love the way he flies downhill. He is such a willing tackler. He loves to get dirty, like in the mud, in the box, against the run. He's a really good tackler. He's lengthy. It's hard to get around this kid. I love watching him press tight ends, like big tight ends in coverage. Like you saw that a lot on film. That's his forte on third down. He's the one. He's got stiffer hips, so I don't love the idea of him covering a slot receiver. And he's stylistically similar to Sidney Brown, but I think he's a better coverage safety than Brown, especially against tight ends. And he's an athlete. Like he has that long-range speed. He's very rangy like Brown is. He has a great vertical. Again, he's stiffer in the hips, but I think Kevin Winston Jr., if he did not get hurt in 2024, you could make the argument that he'd be right there with Malachi Starks and Nick Emenwari. Like his 2023 tape is really good. Most people would see this as a reach. Odds are you want to trade down and take Winston early on day 2. But if the Eagles just stayed there at 32 and picked him, I would like it more than most. So those are three guys that might be seen as a reach that I don't see as reaches. Darius Alexander, the Toledo defensive tackle, Donovan Jackson, the Ohio State guard, and Kevin Winston Jr., the Penn State safety. When you look at the Eagles roster, the way it's constructed, they're going to be relying on young players, day two, year two players, year three players, rookies. I want to get into how this new roster almost doesn't have a middle class anymore, and I'll tell you why that's a good thing coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Gametime. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. I'll never forget the 2017 Monday night just massacre of the Washington football team. Carson Wentz on a run to win MVP, puts up over 400 yards and 4 passing touchdowns for the Eagles to win their 9th straight game. That was actually my first regular season game ever in Philadelphia, live on Monday Night Football. That's the kind of rush you can get through Gametime. Getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. Gametime comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Gametime Picks is awesome. Curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to not just sports, but concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The lowest price guarantee guarantees you a better price at Gametime. If you find a price at another platform that is better, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Plus, they give you peace of mind with seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, so I was thinking about this, kind of watching how Howie Roseman built this roster and now preparing for the 2025 NFL draft. And, I think there was a good amount of shock from Eagles fans during free agency about just how inactive Howie was. I think we all knew there was going to be some tough decisions made. Howie even said it at his combine press conference that he was preaching patience from the fans, like let the whole offseason play out before you judge what he's going to do. I think we knew, considering the state of the roster, how much money is going into prime players, who eventually is going to need new contracts as well, like Jalen Carter soon, the $40 million a year man. It's coming. It is coming. So I think we all knew they weren't going to keep Josh Sweat and Milton Williams and Mekhi Becton and Darius Slay. I don't think we thought they would trade Chauncey Gardner-Johnson as well. We knew some of this was coming, but for all of those players to leave, whereas the only guy they kept of that class was Zach Bond. They didn't even keep Isaiah Rodgers or Oren Burks, some of those more low-key free agents that we thought could replace a Darius Slay, could replace potentially Zach Bond or Nakobe Dean this year. Even those guys left. So I think there definitely was some shock from the Eagles fan base that they were just so inactive, because Eagles fans are used to Howie Roseman doing crazy things every year, making trades, signing big-name free agents like Saquon Barkley. I mean, they're used to that kind of offseason, and this year was not that. So I think that's part of the shock. But also what was part of the shock was who the Eagles let go. At positions, normally they don't let those guys leave the building. Like, you rarely see this team let a 25-year-old in his prime, an elite pass-rushing defensive tackle, leave the building. That's homegrown. Normally, that's a guy the Eagles keep forever, or a rising star on the offensive line that's in his prime, like Mekhi Becton, or a 27-year-old homegrown edge rusher in Josh Sweat that could have been a Super Bowl MVP last year. Even if they do this with Dallas Goedert, an elite tight end that is homegrown. Normally, a lot of those players at those positions, the Eagles prioritize. They prioritize the trenches. They have paid tight ends and drafted tight ends early a lot over the last 15 years, like Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert and Brent Selleck, they've invested a lot in. So normally, I think that's part of the shock too, is normally these are moves the Eagles do make, and they didn't make them this year. Again, a lot of other players at those positions the Eagles already have paid or need to be paid, and you can't pay them all. So that's the main part of the reality. But I actually also see having to let these guys go as a positive in another way. It's not just because they do have pieces already at those positions, but another reason they didn't keep these guys, and I think it's a good thing, is because for the first time in a long time, they have stars at other positions, like cornerback and linebacker and running back, that they paid or want to pay in the future, And they're actually sacrificing the trenches as a result. They're actually not going to pay potentially a tight end and an edge rusher and a defensive tackle and a right guard because they paid a running back and they paid a linebacker and they're planning on paying cornerbacks. And that's something that I think is a positive, is for the first time, I think, in his career, Howie Roseman isn't sacrificing these other positions in the name of the trenches. Right? I think, and I don't know if that's going to change long term. I don't know if Howie's going to change his philosophy where suddenly he's always taking running backs early or paying them in free agency. Same thing with linebacker or corner. But I do think he's changed in the sense, like, he's always going to prioritize the trenches, but I do think he's changed, whereas he's willing to draft or sign or extend elite players at any position. He's willing to do it now and adjust his building in the process. Whereas in years past, even if he had a good linebacker like TJ Edwards, he was going to let him walk. He had a good running back in Miles Sanders or DeAndre Swift. He let those guys walk. You know what I'm saying? He had cornerbacks that were pretty solid, and he let them go, or he just never invested in that position early in the draft or with a big contract because he was willing to go more bargain bin shopping for those positions because he was investing everything, first-round picks, second-round picks, all of his money in the trenches. And again, I do think that philosophy will always be the main staple of Howie's roster building. Like, he's not going to stop paying the trenches and investing top picks in them the majority of the time. But I also do think he's less about settling at these other spots. And that's part of why he had to let these trench players go, is because he's not willing to let Zach Bond go like he let TJ Edwards go. He's not willing to let Saquon Barkley go in free agency eventually because, like he did Miles Sanders. He's planning on, I think, paying Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. So that's part of, I think that's a good thing. Like, these guys leaving is a good thing because the roster, I think, is more balanced. They're not winning in spite of really any position anymore. And that's good because I was so sick of that over the years. And now he's still sacrificing one position, at least, in the name of these others. Safety, trading away Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I think he'll probably end up replacing him with a cheaper free agent like, Justin Simmons, or a rookie like, a Malachi Starks or a Kevin Winston Jr., or it's a Sidney Brown that's already in-house. But I don't think he's settling at other positions as much anymore, and that's a good way to look at how to feel about these free agents leaving. But also at the same time, he's not settling at these other positions, but he's not settling in the trenches either. Like I said, just because Josh Sweat left and Milton Williams and Mekhi Becton doesn't mean he's saying, oh, we're going from back to front now on defense. Like, we're building around the secondary and the linebackers and not the trenches. And on offense, like, no, it's about running backs now and receivers and finesse. It's not about the offensive line. No, number one, he has a bunch of players at those spots already that he's invested top picks and top money into, or he's planning on paying those guys. And the players that are replacing these free agents that left, they're not Band-Aid signing free agents. They're not like just typical like cheap veterans. Azeez Ojulari could be a piece. Joshua Uche could be a piece. Kenyon Green could be a piece. But the plan isn't for those, like, normally those guys in years past would be like plan A for Howie at some of these positions. But they're plan B or C now. Like, they have young players that were top picks that are filling these roles, or young players that have flashed. Like, they have Jalix Hunt. They have Moro Ijoma. They have Tyler Steen. I think that's a good part of this as well, is Howie is, instead of going for the Band-Aid moves now, he's kind of cut off that middle class of this Eagles roster. Whereas now it's basically the starters are either top paid stars in their prime or their first, second, third round picks on rookie deals. And it's a good way to, number one, balance your roster from a cap perspective, because you're either paying guys a lot or a little. They're either getting paid a ton of money or they're on rookie deals. But it's also a way to still have star power when you're not paying players. Like, I like this a lot better. It's the holes that we have to fill where we're not paying a guy top money. The player we're filling in there, yeah, they're young and inexperienced, but they're a first, second, or third round talent. And I like that. It's the best way, I think, to save money but still get star play without. It's a way to not settle. It's a way to remove the Band-Aid, the Band-Aid signing. And they still made a lot of those in free agency this year as contingency plans, but they're no longer moving forward as like that's the goal. is for those guys to start. Like, that's plan A, and we're going to move forward and just keep investing in the trenches and these other positions. Like, I think this is a really good way to balance out this roster. And of course, you have to hit on your draft picks in this scenario. You have to have stars worth paying in this scenario. But I think that cutting out the middle class, I like it a lot. And, bringing in those guys as backups and role players. But I think it's a good idea to, especially when you're paying so many prime players, to say, we're not going to pay the B plus free agent anymore. You either have to be an A or we're going to replace you through the draft. And it's kind of an arrogant strategy. You're banking on hitting on these draft picks. But Howie Roseman has such a good track record in the draft the last few years that I get it. And I think it's the best way to build this roster moving forward. And then timeline-wise, it works too, because when these younger defensive players get older and hit their prime and it's time to pay them, odds are those prime players on offense are older and you can start to replace them with top draft picks, first or second round picks. So I know this is like a deep philosophical talk about the way the Eagles are building their roster, but I kind of like the way that he's building this roster right now with no middle class. And again, it's a little shocking that he's let a lot of guys go at positions normally he doesn't let them walk. But it's again because Howie's trying to find a way to not settle on this roster anymore. He's not as willing to sacrifice other positions like linebacker, running back, corner. Now, again, he's got great players at those spots. And again, long term, I don't think it's going to be as balanced as it is right now, where he's drafting corners and safeties and linebackers and running backs at the same clip as the trenches. But if he has a great player there now, he is willing to keep them. If he doesn't have a great player there now, he is willing to spend a big asset in that position. And I think that's good. I think that's a good thing. I think that's a really good thing. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Because of this new philosophy, though, it might be time for the Eagles to replace their tight end, Dallas Goedert, 30 years old. I just think it's inevitable that he's going to be gone. I ranked my 5 most preferred ways to replace Goedert if that is the reality. We'll get into that coming up next as we wrap up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. All right, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, and we've talked a good amount about Dallas Goedert's future with Philadelphia. You guys know where I stand. I don't want to lose Dallas Goedert for this year, even if they don't sign him to a long-term contract, which I'm comfortable with, but if they don't want to, I'd still love to find a way to, make it worth his while this year, guarantee him some money on that last year of his deal, make one last run at a repeat, and then let him walk next year. I'd rather have that than trade him for a 4th or 5th round pick. If you can, use him as part of a big trade up like I did on Monday to get up into the top 15, top 20 of the draft, then okay, boom, like that's a better way to do it. But I'd rather keep him. But I don't think Philadelphia is going to do that. That's not the way how he operates. If a guy has 1 year left on his deal, normally he likes to get, and he knows he's not going to pay him. Normally he likes to move on and get something for that guy and not just let him walk out the door. So if that is the, scenario that plays out, here are the 5 ways, the 5 most likely scenarios. I rank them 1 through 5 based on my preference of what I'd want to see them do to replace Dallas Goedert. Number 1 would be to draft a tight end on day 1 or day 2. I think this is the most obvious and simple strategy, but I think it would be the most effective if you lose Goedert. The tight end class is loaded. It's loaded. I mean, from Tyler Warren, who you're not going to have a chance at, but Colston Loveland from Michigan. Like, those are 2 players that are going to be first-round picks. I think you have a chance at Loveland. Day 2, you have Mason Taylor from LSU. I really like him. He's a smooth technician. You've got Elijah Arroyo, a bigger, raw, more athletic tight end, fast, go up and get it kind of player. Gunnar Helm, a player that is an above-the-rim type of tight end, a contested catch king, a really good blocker. There's Harold Fannin, who's a more undersized gadget tight end, really good run after the catch ability, good in the screen game. If you want to replace that part of Dallas Goedert's game, explosive plays, Harold Fannin might be your cup of tea. But there's so many guys. I just rattled off, 5 to 6 prospects that you have a shot at on day 1 or day 2 to replace Goedert. And I think even if they had Dallas Goedert this year, these are players you'd want to get your hands on and use them in 12 personnel. So I think that would be my most preferred option, is to just take a tight end in this deep class and then move forward there. I think that's the most simple way to do it. And I think one of those guys will be available for you, whether it's at 32 or 64, or it's a small trade up in either round. I think that's the best way to go about it. The second way to do this, my second most preferred option to replace Dallas Goedert, is just to commit to Jahan Dotson being the third passing target for Jalen Hurts behind A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I'm a big fan of Jahan Dotson. There's a reason he was a first-round pick in 2022. Is he that player that lived up to that ceiling? No, but he doesn't have to be. When he was the Commanders' second to third option in that passing game, when they had Terry McLaurin and even Curtis Samuel as well for a few years there, again, was he a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2? No. But he was a guy that had over 500 yards both times. He was an explosive player. I think we saw down the stretch last year when his number was called for the Eagles that he stepped up. Like those games at the end where it was all the backups, I thought he played really well in Week 17 and Week 18. In the playoffs, when his number was called, he caught the touchdown against the Packers in the wild card, 2 explosive plays in the Super Bowl. I think Dotson, there's a middle ground between who he was last year and who he was, what he was drafted to be in Washington. He's not a top 2 target on an NFL team, but he's also somebody that can make more of an impact than he did for the Eagles last year. He was a guy that when his number was called, he did step up. I mean, that contested catch against Jacksonville was unbelievable. And his number wasn't there a lot because he was running clearing routes most of the year. But if Dallas Goedert's gone, you could elect to just go with more receiver help to replace him rather than a tight end. You might say, let's have Dotson be that guy. He's ready to go year 2 with Jalen Hurts. They're building chemistry. He's still a young player. Maybe you just say, let's commit to Dotson as that third guy, and we're more of a wide receiver-centric offense this year, as that third target, rather than it coming from those targets being replaced by another tight end. And then maybe you just take the tight end by committee approach with Calcaterra, with some of the young guys like Harrison Bryant you brought in, and maybe a later draft pick. It's an option that I'm okay with because I'm a big believer in Dotson. You guys remember, I'm sure, our long-term listeners, back in 2022, he was a my guy of Lou DiBiase. So I don't hate that idea. I think Dotson's ready for a bigger role this year, whether Goddard's back or not, whether you invest in a premier tight end prospect or not. The third option for me would be to draft a receiver on day 2, and a lot of it is the same logic as committing to Dotson. Again, the Eagles might say, we don't have to replace Goddard's production with a tight end. We can find it in the form of a different style of receiver. I mentioned it yesterday. What if a Matthew Golden falls in your lap at 32 and you say, let's go get that niche kind of deep threat 4-3 speed player to complement A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and to have him rotate through with Dotson. You can run more 4 receiver sets, more empty sets, like spread the offense out, which I think really helps Jalen Hurts at times. I think that's an option, not even on day 1, but I'm talking more day 2, like another Texas receiver that I could see them going for. Isaiah Bond. If you want to go for an explosive player to replace Dallas Goedert's deep yardage, it doesn't have to be, again, in the form of a tight end. It could just be by adding more receivers. And when you look at Dotson, he only has 1 year left on his contract. You could pick up the 5th-year option to have 2 years of team control, but there's no way they're paying him the average salary that it would take to use that option on him, as he is a former first-round pick. So they might prefer to, long-term get that third target through the draft. It could be through tight end. That's the preferred number 1 option, but it could also be through a receiver as well. Number 4, make a tight end trade. I'm not saying they're going to trade for Kyle Pitts, although that is somebody out there that I think could be available. But maybe it's for like Michael Mayer of the Las Vegas Raiders, a former second-round pick. Another guy that I'm thinking that, has kind of been lost in the weeds of a deeper offense with the Green Bay Packers. Luke Musgrave. Tucker Kraft. Musgrave was actually the earlier pick than Kraft a few years ago on day 2 in the second round out of Oregon State. But Musgrave's a player that now is tight end 2 because Tucker Kraft has been a reliable target for Jordan Love. And Green Bay is such a by-committee weapon group. They've got Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson and Dontavian Wicks. Who else? Of course, Jaden Reed's probably their best one there. So Musgrave is kind of the 5th or 6th option on that offense. When you also add in Josh Jacobs, maybe you kick the tires on, you buy low on a Luke Musgrave. I think that's another guy that's in that similar tier as Michael Mayer, a similar situation of a second-round pick that's kind of fallen out of favor on their offense, and maybe you could get him for cheap. And if the Packers draft another passing target this year, I think he could definitely be available. So that would be my 4th preferred option to replace Goedert, is to make a tight end trade for Michael Mayer, Luke Musgrave, one of those kind of players. And then my 5th option here, I don't love this one, is just to stick with your in-house options to, bank on Grant Calcaterra, getting more of a workload and, Harrison Bryant, Kalen that you signed from the Colts. I don't love that. I think they do have to add somebody else or give Dotson a bigger workload. If you think Calcaterra is going to come in and be that third guy, and I don't think they do see this as an ideal or a possible plan, just by using these 3 tight ends in a committee without giving Dotson more work as well, and you just say these tight ends are who we're throwing the ball to. I doubt it. That's my least favorite option, and they're definitely going to bring in somebody else. Even if they commit more to Dotson, they're going to bring in another passing target through the draft or through a trade or through something, free agency, whether it's at receiver or tight end. If they lose Dallas Goedert, that's a lot of production to make up for. They'll bring somebody in, even if there is more of a commitment to Dotson. So those are my 5 options to replace Dallas Goedert. Number 1, draft a tight end on day 1 or day 2. Number 2, commit to Jahan Dotson more. Number 3, draft a receiver on day 2. Number 4, make a tight end trade. Number 5, stick with in-house options. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with my guys, Damian Parsons, who I got to get on this show to talk some draft, and Keith Sanchez as well. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.